Okay, here we are. Well, the first thing I want to tell you is that we ain't in a cave. Miners called it a drift or adit. A cave is more nature-made. Take a look around. You can see some quartz veins overhead. It's them white streaks of rock that go up over our heads. Up here, quartz is what gold miners look for because that's where the gold is, mixed in with the quartz. We like to call quartz the mother of gold. Keep looking up here. A vertical opening like this where the quartz was contained is called a stope. It's 20 feet up here, and they did all their work standing on timbers that used to be between the walls. I'll explain more about that later. You might want to think about how they dug this here stope and the drift itself. Well, I'll tell you now, it was a tough job, let me tell you. But when you are following a promising quartz vein, you don't mind so much. Let's start walking on down the drift until you see number 2 on the right. Here we are at the next stope. Take a look. Have you noticed yet how that water turns the white quartz vein that brown color? It's not the water that stains the quartz. It's the iron, pyrite, and magnetite dissolved in it. The water comes and goes throughout the years, but that rust stain is there forever. We miners say gold rides an iron horse, because when we see that brown color, we know we've got a good chance of finding gold. Iron pyrite has gotten pretty famous as fool's gold. Say, in case you are wondering, I'm no scientist, but I learned some of these names and stuff about rocks from my brother-in-law, Jake. He's what you call it, a geologist. He taught school for years down in Sacramento. As Jake explains it, when the quartz rock was once molten way down under the surface of the earth, the gold sometimes got mixed in with it, and then it was all forced up through the slate. Then everything cooled off, and when miners like me came along, millions and millions of years later, well, it was just like somebody planned the whole deal. Now let's go on to point number 3. You'll come to it right soon. Here we are at number 3. I want to tell you something kind of interesting here. It's another stope, pretty small one, I'll admit, and like the first 2, it must have been difficult because there was groundwater constantly seeping in on the miners at the time. But these miners are what we call pocket miners. They were just looking for the visible pockets of gold. So though they got most of the gold-bearing quartz out of the vein, you can still see some stringers of quartz way up there at the top. And who knows, maybe there's still some more gold in there that they couldn't see. As you can see, quartz rock is real easy to spot, especially in between slate. Oh, by the way, most of the rock in here, black and brown, is called slate. Although they didn't mine it here, because they were just after that gold, slate had its uses too, for chalkboards, roofing shingles, pathways, billiard tables, and so on. Well, I guess it's time to move on to number 4. Yes, sir. It sure is easier for you folks walking on this board floor than the one they had. It was mud with ore car tracks on it. The lighting's better than them candles they had, too. So anyway, here at signpost number 4 is a remarkable formation that shows just how powerful Mother Nature is. Look at the arch-shaped formation. See the layers of rock? Jay calls it metamorphic rock. According to Jake, those layered strips of rock were once the bed on an ancient lagoon. Millions and millions of years ago, unbelievably strong forces started moving stuff around here. Things like strong earthquakes and such lasted for days and lifted the whole seabed up until the layers were vertical. Incredible, isn't it? Well, I guess it's time to move on to number 5. Now look above the support timbers, and right overhead there is a real large stope. It probably goes up 25 feet or more. They was following a series of gold-bearing quartz veins that looked like the branches on a tree. It started right here at the level of this drift and kept going up and spreading out. It must have really been something to see the gold that was here. Do you see that large wooden log wedged between the walls? Us miners called it a stall. We use stalls built to support the rock and to stand on. Can you see more of the small round depressions that would have held the stalls? When you're ready, I'll meet you at number 6. Now I'm going to tell you something about hard rock mining. What What you hear is men drilling holes the old-time way. Double jack, two guys working together. One holds the drill, or steel as they called it, against the rock face of the drift. The other swings that double jack, or sledge, against the end of the steel. This drives the point of the steel into the rock. After each hit, the guy holding the steel gives it a quarter turn. It takes a while, but you end up with a hole about 3 feet or so deep and as big around as a 50-cent piece. Take a look. You might see a hole or two. You probably already figured out why they're drilling these holes. Yes, sir, that's right. That is where they put the explosive. But we'll talk about that later. Probably notice, too, that the adit takes a turn to the left here. It now becomes what is called a crosscut. They had to make a big decision right here because the gold-bearing quartz vein had played out. They decided that they would likely hit another vein if they went this way, so they started drilling and blasting this crosscut to the next vein structure. Oh, by the way, as we walk on, look above to your right. Jake calls that white stuff talc schist, and where it meets the slate, a contact line. Now we'll meet at number 7 on the left. You know all the drops of water won't hurt you. It's just groundwater seeping through the rock. It's something us miners had to deal with a lot. We always tried to dig the drifts with a slight downgrade towards the portal to help this water drain out of the mine. Otherwise, we'd be ankle deep in water along about now. I know it's a tad dark in here, but look up at the ceiling and the walls too. That slick stuff you see here is called flowstone, which is being gradually deposited by the water. This is what makes those strange formations you see in those famous caves. It's amazing what Mother Nature can do, isn't it? Oh, it's time to move along, so we will go to number 8. Look out for it on the right, just ahead. Well, here we are at number 8. It is rather dark here, but if you look real carefully, you'll see another drill hole just above the sign. This hole is a place where they packed the drill hole with explosive, but it didn't go like they figured it would. They just didn't put enough powder in. Better for a miner to not put in enough than too much. Oh, you tamp in too much and you've got a cave in. We call this a bootleg hole, amongst other things. I guess you figured by now miners got their own language for lots of things in a mine. You'll learn a few more. Now it's time to move on to number 9. I'll meet you there. Here at number 9 is a junction where 2 adits meet. Notice how they go off in 2 different directions. This is where they finally hit the ore they was looking for. By the way, ore is any rock containing a precious metal like gold in a paying quantity. Now look over your head. This shaft was a killer to work, but there was plenty of rich ore. It's kind of hard to tell because it angles some, but the shaft goes clear up to the open air at the top of the hill. It's actually called an air shaft. Can you feel the air moving? Isn't that something? It's about 110 feet up to the surface. They had to go clean up to the surface because the air was getting so foul in here. They could hardly work more than 15 or 20 minutes and they'd be gasping for breath. The fresh air made a difference. The timbering is a modern version of what we call square set timbering. It's supporting the air shaft and goes up 90 feet. The ore bin and chute on your left was for dropping ore down from above into the waiting ore car, which you see right here. Please press number 10 now. Please do not go beyond the ore car, but if you look down the drift at 10, next to the light, this is about the end of the mine on this side. Who knows? There may be more gold just beyond. But we can't mine here no more because this is a park and a protected historical site for all to enjoy. I'll meet you at number 11 to the left of the drift here in a minute. Look at those wires in the heading at the end of the drift. They represent fuses ready for a round of explosives to be detonated to extend this mine a few more feet. They use dynamite for the explosive. Fuses were cut to the proper length for timing and attached to the dynamite sticks. The sticks were tamped into the drilled holes in the rock like I talked about drilling earlier, and the holes were capped with damp drill cuttings, and it would look like you see here. That's the bell signal for ready to blast, or they'd hear the blaster yell, "Fire in the hole." The fuse were lit. Then, after the smoke and gases cleared, if done right, they'd see an adit about 3 feet longer. That would also be a nice pile of rock and ore for them to clean up. This material would be mucked into the waiting ore car you see. It was then taken by the ore car to the outside. That sign by the ore car tells you most everything you need to know about it, except what a chore it was to move that thing down a track to the outside loaded with rock. The waste rock going to the dump pile outside the portal to the left, and the ore placed in a wagon and taken to the stamp mill. Now the stamp mill crushed the quartz into fine powder. That powder got processed with water and quicksilver. Quicksilver, or mercury as some folks call it, is funny stuff. It attracts gold like a magnet. Oh, you'll learn more about this at the stamp mill. A downright fascinating part of your visit to the Gold Bug mine. Well, as you can see, we've reached the end of the mine. You might be wondering why they didn't keep going on. One reason, that it is probably the main one, 1942 came along, and with it, World War II. Mining gold was declared non-essential and not allowed in most cases like here. When the war ended, the economy and job market was expanding, and it was easier to get a good paying job. So they never came back here again. Well, anyway, let's just head on down the way we came and look for number 12 on the right-hand side. Here we are at number 12. Notice those support timbers. They have names. The posts support the cap. 2 posts and 1 cap make a set. 2 or more girts connect each set. The lighting you see overhead can be placed over the caps or along the sides as needed. The whole setup is called post and cap timbering. Oh, say, before I go, though, I'm going to answer a question that I bet has been on the tip of your tongue the whole time. And that is, just how much gold did they take out of this mine? Well, I would say that it was probably enough to keep them in beans and Levi's for a long time. But we'll never know exactly how much. So go ahead and I'll meet you at number 13 when you get there. Well, here we are at the portal. I hope you have had a pleasant and interesting time. It has been my pleasure. I always like talking to folks about the gold bug. Remember now, your tour ain't finished yet. Ask the attendant how you get yourself up to the stamp mill and learn how they got all that gold out of that quartz. And while you're in that area, don't forget to visit the blacksmith shop where they fashion tools and other items from iron. You come back again. Bye now.
Had a foundry in San Francisco, and in the late 1800s he came up into the Sierras, and he saw how they were crushing the quartz ore coming out of the various hard rock mines, and he decided there had to be a better way of crushing the ore. He went back to his foundry, sit down, designed and built this thing. He got the patent rights to them and started selling them for $10,000 a piece, and within 2 years he had made $1 million selling these things. Now, he never lifted a pick or a shovel in the gold mining industry, but yet this is where he made an easy $1 million. Most of the men who worked in the mines did not make much money. They made their wages, but they didn't make millions. So the people who furnished or built equipment like this are the ones who got rich, or the people who own the mines would get rich as well. The ore that supplies this machine came from the name is skipping my mind offhand here. The Silver Pine mine.
Oh,
the
we just
Silver
passed
Pine
it.
is at the very top of this building, and they brought out that quartz ore from way down deep in the ground, and it starts its trip down into this building using gravity to move all that ore. First, it is dumped into a bin that's back up there, comes down those chutes and into the back of the machine. And there's a little machine right behind the lady here that actually distributes the exact amount, the right amount of ore into the back of the machine. If you put too much ore into the machine, it would stop the machine. And if you didn't put enough ore in, it wasn't really being efficient either. So it was powered by water from the American River about 2 miles away, and it took 7 miles of ditches and flumes to get the water here. And a Pelton water wheel then would turn the big belt, turning the big wheel, turning this camshaft. Now I'll show you how all that works when we go down the stairs. But on each cam, there were 2 lobes, each lobe capable of lifting up the rod about 12 inches and then letting it fall by gravity, crushing the ore down here in the mortar box. You can see here one of the lobes is pushed up on the underneath side of the tappet, this piece right here. Now the tappet, rod, and stamp, along with the shoe on the very bottom of the stamp, all weigh between 750 to 1,000 pounds each. And each one of these rods is going to be going up and down about 2 times every second. The noise was horrendous in here.
Oh my goodness.
How much did each stamp weigh?
Between 750 to 1,000 pounds on this model. There were other models that he made that were bigger.
And 2,000 pounds is a ton, so half a ton each.
Yeah, half a ton each. Now the shoe on the very bottom of the stamp was a replaceable item. It was designed to wear. This is one here that's worn, and you can see how it's worn there, and it wore unevenly. It weighs about 40 pounds now. The new one that replaces it weighs about up to 250 pounds.
Wow.
I'm going to lift this thing up and you can get an idea how this thing sounded here.
Oh my goodness, that's just one.
That's just one and one whack 2 times every second.
Wow.
Oh,
Roughly
you'd have
every
to.
2 times every second.
They'd
Probably
go
go
deaf.
deaf.
Yes, they did. They did go deaf if they stayed with the job very long at all. The job was considered to be a very good job. It was a high-paying job, and you got to stay topside rather than going down deep in the mines to make a living, and the mines had their dangers too. Now, that stamp in the shoe had to be replaced about every month to 2 months. It would wear out, and you had to change the shoe while the machine was running. They would stop the one stamp by engaging a little 2x4 looking device called a finger latch back here. And that 2x4 was engaged under the tappet when it was in its utmost position. Okay. Now you hope that it didn't let go. If it let go and your hand was down there, you lost your hand or at least fingers. Okay. The ore they were bringing out of the mine was quartz ore. You probably have all seen this by this time. It's all over the place up here.
Yeah.
Well, the white part is the quartz, the red rusty part is iron, and the miner's saying goes, gold rides the iron horse. And what that meant was, in the quartz, if there was iron, there was a good chance the gold was riding right along with the iron. An iron horse, of course, is a locomotive. Yeah.
Cool.
It almost looks like dried blood, the way the iron is.
Sometimes the iron would be a different color too. See if I have one up here that can illustrate that.
Would they actually see the gold veins running through it too?
You could, but that wasn't what they were after. What they were after were little flakes of gold.
Oh.
Okay. But sometimes the iron would be a little different color. There you can see it's kind of a red, orangish color.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was yellow, sometimes black. Yeah. Little flakes of gold that they were after. They were not after nuggets.
So it would actually pulverize it that fine.
Yes. Now they're not crushing the gold. The gold is in little flakes in here.
What is this?
The gold
Is this
stands
called
there.
hard rock mining?
Yes.
As opposed to placer mining, which is getting it out of the streams and
Right.
dry
A
beds.
free mining, a free gold.
Okay.
Wow.
Now, if you had the time, you could actually sit out here in the sunlight and look at it. And eventually, you would see the little flakes of gold. They are in there. But they add water to this, and they made mud. Their slurry, as it was called. And that slurry would actually come out of the window here, passing through a set of screens across the window. And those screens were very, very fine.
Yeah.
So no large rock was going to come out of this machine. Been using it ever since. It works great. It does make a little bit of noise, but nothing's going to hurt your ears like the big one did. Here we go. You get the idea how it made a lot of noise, and this is going in slow motion compared to the big one. So the ore that went in was about this size, and what came out was a powder as fine as baby powder that I showed you in the jar, and they added water to it while it was in the mortar box, and they made a slurry. The slurry came out the filters at the very bottom of the mortar box, and that slurry ran over the amalgamation tables. Those tables were right where we were standing, or would have been there. The top of the table was copper, and onto that copper table, they would spread mercury, a liquid metal. And mercury sticks to copper like paint sticking onto a wall, but it doesn't dry out. The copper holds it in place even though that table is sloped. So now they turn on the machine, the slurry starts running over that mercury, and the mercury does what it does best. It grabs gold. Every little speck of gold that's in that slurry, the mercury grabs hold of it and hangs onto it like a magnet holding onto iron. It's the same kind of attraction between the two chemicals. Now, mercury cares nothing at all about that quartz. It lets the quartz fall right off the end of the table. So now we've effectively separated 2,000 pounds of quartz to obtain 1 ounce of gold on this table. And that's actually a fairly good assay or value. 1 ounce of gold is about the size of a quarter. 2,000 pounds of quartz would fill up a large ore cart, or roughly that display case right there. Now, they scrape up the mercury and gold and roll it into a ball about the size of a baseball. And they bring it down into this room in the stamp mill, and in this room we're going to separate the gold from the mercury. And we do that in a little device called a retort. And this is a retort right over here in the corner. Now note the little pot right there, the lid on it, and the lid has a vent pipe attached to it. And to lock that lid down and make a good seal right there, they had a horseshoe-shaped locking ring, which they engaged very, very tightly. We're going to be heating this stuff up, and the mercury is going to vaporize. And if the vapor gets out of the machine in that particular location, and you breathe that vapor, you could get a disease called Mad Hatter's disease. The hatters in those days used to use mercury and felt to make the hat, and it made a beautiful hat. The only problem is the men making the hats were going crazy, thus the name Mad Hatter from Alice in Wonderland. That's where it comes from. Now what it looks like on the inside is this. They put the gold ball right down inside here. They put the lid on top of the apparatus. They seal it up. They turn on the heat. At 650 degrees, mercury vaporizes just like water vaporizes at 100 degrees. That vapor travels down the pipe, and on the outside of the vent pipe they had a water jacket with cold water running through it to chill the mercury vapor down until it turned back to liquid mercury. And once it was liquid mercury at the end of the pipe, it would be recycled right back to the tables and used over and over again. In theory, the mercury never left this room. However, they had to keep ordering more mercury from time to time, so obviously some of it was getting out of here. Now, what's left is called sponge gold. It's full of holes where all that mercury was, giving it the appearance of a golden sponge ball. Now, it's about 87% pure gold. It's not pure enough yet, but we don't have a furnace here capable of melting gold at that time. So they had to set it aside and call up Wells Fargo to come and get it. The stagecoach would come up here, the driver would take the strong box out from under his seat on the stagecoach, bring that strong box in here. It was called an express box. He would load it up with all the gold. It better weigh the same thing in San Francisco as it did when he put it in here, or otherwise he was in trouble. Now, down the road it went, a 2-day stagecoach ride to San Francisco, and in San Francisco they would heat up the gold in a big furnace to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Up here we were heating it to 650. We were not melting the gold, only the mercury. Here we're melting the gold. Now, they have it in a big pot. The impurities at that temperature float to the top of the vat of gold, and they scrape off the impurities and pour the virtually pure gold into a mold and make an ingot. The ingot would come out of the mold like that, and if this were real, it would weigh about 40 pounds. It'd be worth $250,000 in today's money. Unfortunately, this gold comes from my garage. It's absolutely worthless.
Yeah.
Not as heavy.
Can you imagine if that was? That'd be like.
That's light. Pass it around.
Now, between here and San Francisco is where I came into the picture. This is me right here, Black Bart.
Why are you wanted?
Uh-oh.
I robbed 28 Wells Fargo stagecoaches in an 8-year period beginning in 1875, all here in the Sierras in Northern California. I walk between Mariposa and the Oregon border, 250 miles. I walk it time and time again, looking for the routes those stagecoaches were going to be taking. And once I found the route, I would wait for the stagecoach to come, and while I'm waiting, I write poetry. Now I'll get back to that a little bit later. Now, the stagecoach comes up the hill, and I jump out in front of that stagecoach with a flour sack over my face with 2 eye holes in it. No one knew what I looked like for 8 full years. I would jump out in front of that stagecoach, stopping the stagecoach and pointing my double-barreled shotgun directly at the stagecoach. This double-barrel shotgun and the gold bar are both made out of the same thing in my garage. I point this thing directly at the driver of the stagecoach, and in very proper English, I was born in England, I tell the driver, if you please, would you throw down the strong box? Well, it worked every time for 27 stagecoach robberies. But on the 28th stagecoach robbery, the driver said no, he would not throw down the strong box. So I asked him why. And he said because Wells Fargo has bolted the express box down inside the cab of the stagecoach, it's bolted to the floor. Now, the driver was the only person on the stagecoach that day. There was no shotgun rider called a messenger, and there were no passengers, just the driver. So I tell the driver to get down off of the stage, unhitch the horses, and take the horses to the top of Funk Hill and wait. Funk Hill is located very close to a town called Copperopolis, which is close to Sonora, California, about 2.5 hours south of us by car. Now, the driver's got the horses up at the top of the hill. I climb inside the stagecoach with an axe, and I broke open that box. It's a wooden box with a lot of metal on it and a good lock. It took a little while, but I got into it and I took out $4,800 worth of sponge gold. This stuff is very valuable. Angle coin. Total was $4,800. Normally my robberies netted me about $400. This is 10 times that amount, and gold is very heavy, so it's beginning to weigh me down. Now, if that wasn't enough, I also steal the U.S. mail. The miners used to put gold dust in those envelopes, so I put that in my pockets too. Now I'm ready to get out of the stagecoach, but before I do, I take a quick look out the window of the stagecoach and I look up the hill to see what the driver's doing up there. When I look up there, I'm expecting to see one man. Instead, I saw 2. The other man was a deer hunter. He had a Henry 44 rifle out hunting deer that day, and that rifle was in the hands of the stagecoach driver, and it was pointed directly at the door of the stagecoach that I was in, and that door was the only way out of that stagecoach for me. Well, I bust through that door running as fast as I can for the trees of the forest, and the driver fired 2 shots at me. Now, fortunately for me, the driver couldn't hit the broadside of a stagecoach with that rifle. Both shots missed. But as I'm running, I hear the deer hunter say to the driver, "Give me back my rifle, I won't miss." Well, I ran a little faster. But that 3rd shot rang out, and when it did, it went right over my left hand. And it was cut and bleeding, and it shook me a little bit, but I kept on running, and I did make it into the forest and into the trees before they could get another shot at me. Now, I ran for a mile, and after a mile, I stopped running. I stitched up the wound myself and stopped the bleeding, and I went on my merry way with the gold from the 28th robbery. Meanwhile, back in Placerville, Wells Fargo is getting tired of having their stagecoaches robbed. They came to Placerville and hired our marshal, a man by the name of James Hume. This man is extremely smart. He looks for clues to solve crimes. Instead of getting a posse together, he looks for clues. Wells Fargo hires him to be the chief of detectives for Wells Fargo. This is sort of like the Pinkerton men, okay? The detective agency in their own right. Well, they tell him to get down there to Copperopolis and solve this crime. So he goes down to Copperopolis, and he's looking around the side of the stagecoach robbery after he talks to the stagecoach driver and the deer hunter, and they tell him everything that happened, and he starts looking for clues. Any idea what clue he would find first?
Injury on your hand?
Blood.
Blood. Well, I followed that trail of blood for a mile, and the trail came to an end. That's where I'd stitched up the wound. So he came back to the stagecoach robbery site, and he looks around for more clues. Now, I had to get out of there in a hurry, because they were firing at me, and I had to leave a few things behind. And one of the things I left behind was a nice, clean, white handkerchief that said FX07 on it. Now, this is a laundry mark. I've accentuated it a little bit. It's a little bigger than a normal laundry mark. But Hume knew that this was a laundry mark. What he didn't know was what laundry and where. But he took it to San Francisco, and he went to 93 laundries with it. At the 93rd laundry, the man said, "This is our mark. We cleaned the handkerchief." Well, Mr. Hume was a pretty clever man. He says, "You know, the gentleman who dropped this handkerchief outside, he dropped it, and I want to return it to him, but I don't know his name or where he lives. If you can give me that information, I will see to it that he gets his handkerchief back personally." It worked. The man looked in his book, and he said, "The handkerchief belongs to Mr. Charles Bowles. This is the real Black Bart." Notice the gold pin he's wearing right there? Bet that gold came from right here in the Sierras. Now they come knocking at my door. Now they have my address as well as my name. And they come knocking at my door with that handkerchief in their hand. And I took one look at the handkerchief. I knew it was mine. And I put my hands up and I said, "Gentlemen, I give up." They arrested me and they charged me with stagecoach robbery, and I confessed to the 28th robbery, and I gave them back the gold from that robbery as well. Now they're looking all around my room for evidence because there's going to be a trial, and they found my double-barreled shotgun. They opened that shotgun up, and there were no shotgun shells. They couldn't find the shells anywhere. So they asked me, "Mr. Bowles, is this the shotgun you used in the stagecoach robbery?" I said, "Yes, it is." And they said, "Where are the shotgun shells? We cannot find them." I said, "Well, that's because I never bought any shotgun shells for that gun. I never loaded the gun, and I never fired it. I robbed 28 Wells Fargo stages with an empty double-barreled shotgun." It's absolutely true. It was never fired. Do you think that made any difference to the judge?
No.
Not a bit. If you use a gun in the commission of a crime in the state of California, you will go to prison. It's the same law now as it was then. I was sentenced to 6 years in San Quentin prison for one count of armed stagecoach robbery. Now, after 4 years in San Quentin, the men at Wells Fargo, the executives, started getting a little nervous because in 2 years I was going to be out of prison, probably robbing their stagecoaches again. At least that's what's going through their mind. Well, those men came to the prison and they met with me, and according to William Randolph Hearst, who owned the Hearst newspaper empire in San Francisco, he built Hearst Castle over in San Simeon, according to him, those men came to the prison and made me this offer. Mr. Bowles, you have now been in prison for 4 years, but you still have 2 more years yet to serve. How would you like to be released from prison today? I said, I'd love to be out of this place. It's not nice in prison at all. But what's the catch? They said, the catch is this. You have to promise us that you will never rob another Wells Fargo stagecoach as long as you live. And we will pay you $125 a month not to rob our stagecoaches. I was that good. Well, I accepted their offer. By the way, $125 is roughly equivalent to $4,000 a month now. It was a lot of money. So I accepted their offer, and I was released from prison that very day. But everywhere that I went in San Francisco, the agents that worked for Wells Fargo were following me, and the reporters that worked for William Randolph Hearst were following me. Those reporters wanted to be there in case I broke my promise and robbed another stagecoach so they could get the news to sell more papers, and the men from Wells Fargo were there to make sure that didn't happen. I got tired of being followed. So one day I got on the train headed down the Central Valley of California, and sure enough, the state of California, a nice little agricultural community. That's where I got off the train, and the men all followed me over to a restaurant, and we sat down and we had lunch, and we were talking, whiling away the whole afternoon, having a good time with our lunch. And while we're talking, I snuck out the back door of that restaurant. I left every one of them in the restaurant. It took Wells Fargo agents weeks to track down where I had gone. They finally found that I had gone to the wharf in Seattle, Washington, booked passage on a clipper ship named Black Bart from that time on. I never did collect $125 a month from Wells Fargo, but my guess